Welcome back to the Morning Grind podcast here at RotoGrinders.com. Once again, I am not Stevie. Of course, Stevie is knocking out all the NASCAR content you guys need if you're your NASCAR, fix. You know where to get that here at RotoGrinders.com. I'm Dean filling in, and what are we doing today? We're talking about a sport that I know very little about, at least a little bit more the last 30 minutes or so. I did a little pre-show, kind of a touch-up and what's going on as far as the AFL. What is the AFL? The AFL Australian Football League, also known as Aussie Rules, also known as footy. I'm not going to enlighten you guys. Somebody is. It's going to be AJ, the host of the Daily Fantasy Rankings podcast, all the way from Melbourne. Are you in Melbourne, AJ?
Certainly am. Yeah, great to be with you, Dean.
There you go. Happy to have you. I want to learn about the AFL. The accent gives you credibility, too. Instant credibility. You come right in. It's like, this guy's going to know exactly what he's talking about. Good morning to you. It's night for me. And, of course, DK is rolling out AFL contest. I'm seeing a showdown slate right now. I believe 60K is one of the tournaments right now. We were talking about this pre-show. Showdown for now, and going forward, I guess, as we get to the weekend, there will be, 4 or 5 game slates as well?
Yeah, that's right. So there'll be a couple of single showdown slates for Thursday and Friday, and then there'll be a showdown slate on Saturday and Sunday. A classic contest on Saturday and Sunday, and then a couple of other sort of showdowns weaved in between it. There's a total of 9 games every round. And actually, it's quite topical at the moment. I just saw yesterday that ESPN have done a deal with the AFL to show an additional 2 live games every week. So I think you guys are getting 7 out of the 9 games live across FS1 and ESPN every week.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, we're watching KBO in the middle of the night, the Korean baseball. Let's watch some AFL as well too. It's gonna be good times for sure. 18 teams, 18 versus 18, which is just wild to us Americans. At least to me, it's a lot of players, a lot of dudes. But of course, that field is huge. And one thing I noticed, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe I misheard this, is the dimensions of the field different depending on the field they're playing at to some degree?
Absolutely. So traditionally, it's an oval shape ground, but some grounds are slightly longer, some grounds are slightly thinner. There's definitely a little bit of variation. Sorry, excuse my 5-month-old puppy that's just being a goose here.
No worries, you're good.
The variations can be quite sort of contrasting. And for a practical example, there's a team, the Geelong Cats, that their home ground is quite long and skinny, whereas the MCG, which is the home of AFL in Melbourne, is a very traditional sized ground, really wide wings, and it's really, really wide. So some teams can very much get caught out, and it can be something you can be using with your strategy for DFS as well, that wingers will be more effective on, say, the MCG than they will be down at GMHBA Stadium, which is down in Geelong.
And I assume teams build their team based upon what their field happens to be and what the strengths are of their players. That would make sense, right?
A little bit. There's certainly a little bit of local knowledge that comes into play. You know, when you go and play at some of those more obscure grounds, it can throw a few teams off. The ground in Geelong that I just mentioned is again, a little bit unique, but not too many of the top-end teams would go down there and play there. It would be very much the sort of minnow teams that would be getting their games down there. So then when the bigger clubs, the bigger teams head down there, it can be a little bit sort of different for them because they just don't have the space. And game plans can be very much built on that kind of thing.
Yeah, let's pull back just for a second because what is AFL? Let's say I've never seen AFL before. I have no idea what it is. I was watching some highlights before the show, and I would say it's a hybrid of soccer, football, volleyball, rugby. How would you describe it to me if I was 5?
It's a really interesting question. It's a very unique game. It has a lot of characteristics of, say, football, where people are kicking and running with the ball. But it also probably has a lot of the agility of basketball, whereas it's a 360 game. People can run in all directions. And then some would say it's sort of got a few traits of ice hockey where, it's quite heavy contact. We're not wearing any pads. Guys are, 6'3" sort of minimum and about, I guess, 110 kilos, which is probably about 200 pounds. And these guys are running, full scream ahead at each other, banging into each other, tackling, crashing. So it's a very fast-moving game. The ball can be carried, it can be kicked, it can be caught. It's very high scoring, and as you touched on before, there's a whole heap of guys on the field at any one time. You've got sort of 36 players on the ground at any time, plus 4 players from each team on the bench. So it's very fast-moving. It's very athletic. It's very entertaining to watch. It can be a little bit confusing and daunting when you first look at it, but it's a great game.
What's the deal with no pads? Why is it just tough guys? Why is that frowned upon?
I don't know. It's something that no one has ever worn padding. Hang on one sec, sorry.
Oh, no worries. You're good. Yeah, it's a 5-month-old.
Yeah, he's in that case. Apologies about that. Yeah, so look, there's never really pads. Look, we do have a few players that wear helmets. As with a lot of sports around the world, concussion has been very much on the agenda over the last couple of years. So there are a few guys that are wearing helmets. But no, it's just never been a game that is padding required. These guys are ultra fit. Obviously with a lot of sporting contests all around the world, all these guys are, professional athletes. They train very hard. They're all in fantastic shape. And I guess a lot of the seasoned players that have been certainly going, or journeymen, you'd like to say, they've just got really rock hard bodies that are, prepared to crash into each other and run and bash and jump and all that sort of stuff.
Bo, you mentioned that there's no crowds right now. I don't know if we talked about that on air or off air, but there's no crowds currently going on. Is it like sort of the NBA bubble where all the teams are playing in the same area? Or are they traveling? I'm assuming they're not traveling.
There is a little bit of travel. So we've got a few hubs going on at the moment. We've got a hub up in Queensland where 6 of the teams are, and there's teams are traveling across the East Coast or up and down the East Coast. There's still a few travel restrictions across the West Coast of Australia. So those teams have moved across east so they can then compete in the competition. Look, we're very fortunate in Australia. Our restrictions are starting to lessen a little bit. We're seeing the first little, signs that crowds could be on the agenda soon. And that will certainly make it a lot easier for us to be playing games all around the country.
Yeah, I saw not too far from you guys. I saw New Zealand, I think, was the first country to have fans coming back, which is good to see, baby steps. But step back for a second as far as injuries. How good is the injury reporting? How concerned should I be that my guy's going to get late scratched in the middle of the night?
Look, I wouldn't say that it never happens, but I would say it's less likely than likely. There are some teams that obviously a little bit more creative with their team announcements, but generally, on a Wednesday or a Thursday, they name the sort of final 22 or 26 players, and then the day before the game, it's sort of cut down to the final 22, and then an hour before the game, there is the confirmed 22. It's very rare that there would be huge DFS impact between that 24 hours and that 1 hour announcement. Again, things happen in warm-ups and training, and, some obscure things can happen. But it's very similar to, say, golf DFS, where you can build your teams on a Tuesday or a Wednesday and have relative confidence that there aren't going to be any huge changes that are going to affect your DFS squad. On the flip side,
okay, sorry.
Sorry. On the flip side, one thing that probably could happen is that a rookie may get announced. So a rookie might be in the extended lineup, and he may get his spot on, in the final 22, which can obviously have some value implications for you. But the chance that let's use the comparison of LeBron James, it's very unlikely that he's going to be named and then suddenly not playing an hour before the game without some sort of, you get some sort of clue that it's going to happen.
Yeah, and so unlike soccer, basically you guys can come in and out of the game, right? 18 and 18, you have 4 subs, and once, like in soccer, once you're out, you're out. But in the AFL, you can jump in and out the entire game, correct?
That's correct. So I think there's 60 or 80 rotations. They change it every year, to be honest. So in every game, there's sort of, at least 60 rotations. So that's very much an endurance strategy that people are trying to keep their best players on the ground all the time. So you can have people from all different positions subbing on and off at all times in the game. So, all 22 players are in play, but time on ground, TOG, is obviously a very important factor when you're thinking about planning your DFS teams.
Yeah, so speaking of your DFS teams, you mentioned LeBron James. Like LeBron James, you're playing him in basketball. You essentially kind of sort of know what you're going to get. You're going to get your 20 points, your 7 boards, your 8 assists, something like that. Maybe you get a blocker or something like that. You know he's going to put up a big number. In a sport like baseball, you can roster the absolute best player in the world. He can give you a 0. You can go for 4, get no hits. Where is the AFL stars as far as variance, as far as reliability? If you're going to roster like the most expensive pieces, are they going to is it a wide range of a potential outcome, or you're going to get something at least good and different degrees of good?
Look, it's the in the center or the midfield where pretty much the stars are playing. Their floor is fairly consistent. If say a player is averaging 100 points per game, and I guess it might blow the mind a little bit to my international followers or listeners here. AFL is a very high-scoring DFS sport. A winning score in a showdown slate or a classic slate may be 700 points. So if you've got the star players scoring, let's say 100, it's very, very unique that they're going to score 20 points. It would have to be that they got injured or something really dramatic. So whether a team wins or loses, you know that they're probably going to score somewhere between 80 and 120 most days, but have a high ceiling of perhaps 130, 140, 150. So the ceiling is probably more variable. The floor is less variable for the stars.
I'm looking at the roster construction here on DraftKings. 2 forwards, 4 midfielders, 2 defenders, and is that a rook? Is that a rook or a ruck?
A ruck, yes, a ruck.
What's a ruck?
So a ruck is the tallest player on the team generally, and they're the person that does what's known as the center bounce. So when they throw the ball up or bounce the ball up after every goal, those 2 ruckmen run and jump at each other, very similar to a center in basketball, and then tap the ball out to the midfielders or the centers.
It's like a jump ball, essentially. And you got a point for yep. That's just like the tallest guy, well, not tallest and most athletic, I suppose, combination of the 2.
Yeah, correct. And obviously in games where there's heavy congestion and more stoppages, which is a ball up, obviously ruckman can be very important for your DFS lineups.
Where am I looking to punt? Where am I looking to save some salary? You talk about midfielders being, generally speaking, the players that are more likely to rack up points. Am I looking to punt a defensive spot because midfielders are more valuable? They have a higher ceiling? Or is it just all slate dependent, team dependent?
Absolutely slate and team dependent. I think that forwards are probably the area that can have the most variance in output. So, if a forward doesn't kick any goals or isn't involved in the action or a particular team is going to get beaten pretty badly, their floor is probably a lot lower because they're just not getting their hands on the ball. But on the flip side, a forward ceiling can be phenomenal if they kick a whole heap of goals and it's a one-sided game. Looking for your value as such for those cheaper players, really it's very slate dependent. As a general rule, we certainly advise people to probably not spend down too much on your forwards. If you can find a midfield that has value, that perhaps has been playing in lower leagues or is given a new opportunity and that's why he's been brought into the team. As I mentioned before, a midfield's floor is going to be a lot less. So someone that might come in at the minimum of 2,500 on DraftKings, you really only need him to get sort of 30 points, 35 points, which is not a huge score in AFL DFS, for him to be a value play.
So the game is 4 quarters of 20 minutes, and there's extra time as well added on, depending, situations that play out throughout the game. Is there ever a time to where you can justify rostering somebody who's not starting? Again, is there certain managers that do certain things and start certain players for different reasons, and maybe a guy would come off the bench but still play enough minutes to justify a roster spot, or it's just too risky to consider a sub?
Look, absolutely. You definitely want to be looking. The interchange is really the positions they get named into a certain extent are not really relevant. It's a game where all players are running across all areas of the field. So just because someone is named on the interchange certainly would not be a reason not to pick them. They're definitely going to get, if you're a midfielder that's named on the interchange, you're still playing probably 60, 70, 80% of game time. They're constantly rotating. There's a little bit of a difference. You just sort of touched on about 20 minutes in extra time. That's been the general size or the general length of games in the past. Due to the pandemic this year, they've actually reduced it to 16 minutes, which doesn't sound like a lot, but you're missing 16 minutes from the game. And we've certainly found a little bit of a trend over the last couple of rounds that the premium and the stud players in the midfield are actually playing more game time. We thought it would be less, but they're actually playing more because they're not getting as tired. So you're finding that sort of some of the lower tier players are doing more of the rotations and the premiums are staying on for more.
When you say the interchange, you're talking about the starting 18. Is that the interchange?
Yeah, so you've got the starting 18 and then you've got 4 people on the interchange or the bench, and they are constantly changing throughout the game. There will be 20, rotations every quarter. So in 16 minutes, that means 20 people are going on or off. A midfielder might play for 3 or 4 minutes, run their guts out, and then go and sit on the bench for 90 seconds and then come back on again, run their guts out for 3 or 4 minutes, and so forth. So interchange is certainly something that you don't want to be scared of. But at the same time, if you're picking a perfect lineup, you want your guys to be on the ground as much as possible. So, right from the word go, people that are named on the field, you want them on the field and in your teams.
How frequent are injuries? It looks like a pretty rough sport. And do we ever see scenarios where teams are down 2 or 3 players and basically everybody's going to stay on the entire game?
There are situations like that. Obviously, it's not so much that they're ever down as such because you do have the 4 interchange players. What will mean is that the key players are getting less breaks. So if someone does a hamstring or, something worse, breaks a leg, breaks an arm, something like that, obviously they're going to have one less person that they can feed through those 60 rotations in a game. So that would most likely mean that there is an increase in game time for those senior players. How often does it happen? I would say that there is a couple of serious injuries per round across the 9 games. It definitely wouldn't be as much as one a game.
All right, let's jump in. How do we score? How do we get DFS points? The most points you get is from a goal that is worth 6 points, and that's I'm going to say this really stupidly, I suppose, but there's 4 posts, and the 2 in the middle, if you kick the ball in between the 2 in the middle, you get 6 points. Is that correct?
That's correct. Spot on, Dan.
Is the referee still doing the thing with the hand? Is that an Australian rules football? Is that something else? You know what I'm talking about? I'm doing a visual here. Is that still a thing, or they have a flag now?
No, they've got both. So they initially signal with 2 fingers for a goal, and then wave 2 flags so they can let the umpire at the other end know. And then if they kick either side of the 2 middle posts, that's a behind, or if they hit the post, that's a behind as well. So that's 1 point, and then they just use 1 finger.
It seems weird that a goal is worth 6 points and a tackle is worth 4 points. A tackle is worth 2/3 of a goal? I don't know. Is that just? That's just a weird observation I have.
Yeah, look, they're not really. They don't really correlate at all. I guess the tackle doesn't happen. A good player, a very good tackling player, may have 7 or 8 tackles in a game, whereas a good team will score anywhere between 10 to 20 goals per game. So obviously the goals are the highest scoring factor, but your midfielders or the centers, they're kicking, they're hand passing, they're marking, they're tackling, and they're possibly kicking goals. So they're the guys that are accumulating most points.
Goals were 6 points. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, opposed to, say, a defender who is very unlikely to kick a goal, that's why you need to be targeting guys that are perhaps kicking the ball more or taking more marks, because their ceiling is certainly not as, there's not as much upside as, say, a forward or a midfield.
6 points for a goal, 4 points for a tackle, 3 points for a kick, 3 for a mark. I think that kind of brings in the conversation of correlation, right? So my understanding, again, correct me if I'm wrong, I just kind of like did some research before the show, and you know much better than me. The mark is where they kick the ball, and the guy just kind of gets on somebody else's shoulders and catches the ball. And I guess if you have the kicker and the marker, that's worth 6 points right there, and that's nice correlation.
Absolutely. And so that's when you're looking to pair players up, there's a thing in AFL, sometimes it's called junk time. So the last couple of minutes of every quarter, sometimes a team may just hold the ball and keep it away from the other team. So if you've got players that are marking the ball, then kicking to another person, they're marking it, then they're kicking it, suddenly you've got 6 or 9 or 12-point plays going on constantly. And if you can find the players that are kicking the ball backwards and forwards with each other, because sometimes they can take it from in the back half and just run it straight across the ground, kicking it backwards and forwards. And there can be 3 or 4 players in that chain just keeping the ball off the other team. So if you can identify those spots and identify the teams that do that, late in the game, they can be the things that win you GPPs, because suddenly you've just racked up 6, 18, 24 points very, very quickly.
Yeah, I'm not sure how familiar you are with American football, but that sounds like the equivalent of just like running the ball, like running out the clock, essentially. Yeah, that's interesting. So basically, the game's more or less over. The margin of a distance between one team versus the other it's too great. So it's more or less a conceding the other side, and they're sort of like kicking it and handballing it to each other in the same team, and just running out the clock. Is that more or less what happens there? And if you have those guys, you can pick the team ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, look, it can actually also be the other way, that the game is really close and they just simply want to make sure the other team doesn't have possession of the ball. So if it's a 1-point game or a 2-point game and they don't want the team to be able to kick another goal or get possession, they'll effectively play keepings off. They're just completely keeping the ball away from the other team.
Oh, my apologies. My house phone is ringing here. We got a dog on your end, and you have a house phone over here. And I'm not within reach of the phone to turn it off. And who calls on a house phone these days? Call the cell phone. What are you doing? My apologies. Goals are 6 points. Tackles 4 points. Kick is 3 points. A mark is 3 points. A handball that's a hand pass, correct?
Correct. Yes. So it's not a throw. It's the ball is held in one hand and the player almost punches it out of their hand. It will sound bizarre to my American friends listening. A hand pass is something that, you'll see can be very quick. They can hand pass the ball, sometimes 30, 40 feet. So it can be quite a lengthy pass. It's obviously a lot quicker and a lot more accurate. But if you receive a hand pass, that's not counted as a mark. A mark is only counted when it is kicked off the boot.
Okay, that makes sense. What's a hit out?
A hit out is when the rucks jump out up in the middle and they both jump in the air like a jump ball and touch the ball and tap the ball down. That's classed as a hit out.
We already talked about a behind. Behind is when the ball is kicked in the outer post, or it hits one of the middle posts. And also, I think if it hits somebody's hand and goes in, it's worth 1 point as well. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes. Spot on.
All right. Free kick is worth a point. This is a big one. Free kick against minus 3 points. Is that like a penalty or something? Is that what that is?
Yeah, kind of. So if you come in, if a player tackles another player above the shoulders, so the head is obviously protected in Aussie rules to a certain extent, and you give away a free kick. So the person receiving the free kick will get plus 1 point, and then obviously they're going to get a kick or a hand pass. The person that's committed the crime or the act is minus 3 points.
Is there a penalty box or a potential ejection of some sort?
No, there is not. There is no red cards or anything like that in AFL. So there have been some instances over the years where full-on brawls and people have just been absolutely sniped and knocked out cold and all those sorts of things. There is a tribunal system that happens and a match review system that awards penalties. But no, there's no sin bin as such.
General lineup construction, stars, scrubs, or just kind of like across the board, a bunch of guys that are kind of in the middle ground? Or again, is this one sort of slate dependent, team dependent, and all that?
Absolutely dependent. I think, look, I'm trying to identify some value plays is obviously very important in AFL. You just can't simply stack a team full of studs. Stars and scrubs does work in some situations. Look, it's very hard to say it's a general rule. There's different teams that provide lots of different outcomes and situations. A common mistake that people can make is that they can try to play too many rookies or too many cheap players to try to squeeze in more stars. So my suggestion for people that are looking to play AFL for the first time, try to identify one value player or two value players at the most. Don't, and when I say value, low priced value, there's lots of value players around the 3,500, 4,000 mark, which, maybe should be priced at 5,000 or 6,000. If you can have more of those players and less of the $2,500 players, your team lineup is going to be so much more balanced.
Where do these rookies come from? Is there a minor league system as well?
Yeah, there is. So there's minor league and state systems across the country. There's feeder clubs, which I guess would be like, in MLB, there's, AAA, is it, or AA, or what?
Single A, AAA, AA. Yeah, each organization has their own, different rungs of.
Yeah, so that's very similar in AFL too. There's feeder clubs or lower range clubs that you've got to be on a list. So I think a list is 44 players. So generally there's sort of 22 players that aren't playing on a day that might be playing in lower level leagues that they can pull players from if they need to.
How international is the AFL player pool? I was watching a video from Vice Sports where somebody was trying to bring some American players over to get a tryout, and I was thinking there's probably a great pool of players to pick from. And of course, they don't grow up playing it, but I'm sure the skills transition to some degree once you try to learn. But is it only Australian players, or how much does it branch out as far as the player pool?
It's definitely something that they're looking into more. We've had quite a good success with players coming from Ireland because Gaelic football is very similar to Aussie rules. We've got an American player at the moment, Mason Cox, who plays for Collingwood. He's about 6'8" or something like that. He's huge. He's a monster. And he has transitioned relatively well to AFL. It's a very hard game to start playing at elite level if you haven't played it or you're not aware of it in your life, or for your whole life. It's taken him a few years to get there. And look, he's certainly talented and he's a huge guy and he's played some good games. He's probably never going to be elite, if that makes sense. But there can be certainly role players in AFL and teams that can use a big, tall guy or, someone with a basketball background, say in the ruck, that can jump higher, things like that. But it's probably less likely that we'll see in the short term players from other countries coming in and playing midfield roles. There's just too much game awareness and too many things that you need to learn.
Your roster 9 players. What's the most I can stack on one side? 4, is it, or 5, or what's the number?
In a showdown, you can have 8, and in a classic state, 5.
And you think 5? I mean, it's worth. You could justify rostering 5 on like a 5-game slate on one side.
Absolutely, stacking is definitely something that can be used in AFL Aussie rules. Again, it's very contest specific. We have a whole range of tools on DFR, which we obviously provide links to you guys at RotoGrinders. So certainly check out the early look articles that you guys are posting with Aussie rules. And that has some links to a lot of data about teams that may give up more points to certain parts of the ground. So if you're playing against a team that gives up the most points to centers or midfielders, there is certainly advantage to be stacking midfields from that team. Again, I wouldn't use with AFL, there's no blanket rule for everything, but there is certainly, everything is on the table.
How extreme is it as far as the good teams from the bad teams? Is it a fairly level playing field, or is there salary cap constraints that make one team dominant over the others?
With results, so in win-loss, obviously the better teams normally stay good for a number of years, as with any sport. There is a salary cap. But as we know with professional sports, it's so much more than salary now. It's environment, it's coaches, it's playing at bigger grounds, it's playing against bigger crowds. My team, the Tigers, that you can see over my shoulder, are the current premiers or the world champs. And obviously players want to come and play at the Tigers because you're playing in front of 90,000 people every week. They're winning. They've got good culture, all those sorts of things. Whereas a team like the Gold Coast Suns in Queensland are a relatively new team. They've been around for about 10 years. They've never really played finals. You can potentially earn the same amount of money at both clubs. If anything, you'll probably earn a little bit less at the Tigers. But people want to play in front of crowds, or they want to live in Melbourne, or they want to play finals. So in regards to DFS, there is certainly a little bit of range between the teams that give up more points than the others and also earn more points, but that gap is a lot smaller. So,
go ahead.
Yeah.
I was surprised to learn 10 of the 18 teams are in Victoria, really, really condensed area. I understand Australia is a vast space, and there's a lot of areas where there's it's just open land essentially. But where your team is in Melbourne, and you weren't just a fan this year. You're not just playing favorites. You've always been a fan of them, I presume.
Oh yeah, I'm 40 and I've followed them my whole life. You don't switch teams in AFL. It's that's not cool. And very much, I went through 35 years of pain of never winning anything and being the joke of the club. And, the last sort of 5 or 6 years have been very good. We've won 2 premierships or 2 championships. And, obviously winning is nice. And I'm sure there's lots of stories like that, the Chicago Cubs or I'm trying to think of an NFL example, but there's lots of teams that you've got supporters that have been crazy mad fans their whole life and have just never seen the playoffs. So, people are very tribal with their teams. You mentioned before that sort of 10 of the teams are in Victoria. Initially, it was known as the VFL, which is the Victorian Football League. And then about 20 years ago, it started to expand across the country. And that's one of the things they're really working on at the moment, is trying to get more teams in different areas of Australia to make it a more national game.
Anything else I need to know, or any other tips that we haven't covered just yet, as far as first diving in, getting your toes wet, however you want to say it, to playing some AFL DFS teams?
Yeah, I would definitely be, again, the tools that we've got on DFR that you guys have got access to at Roto, take a note of correlations as much as they're not overly, and all these tips I'm about to give, I wouldn't take them to the bank and only use them. They're just one piece of the puzzle. So take note of some correlations. Take note of some player out. If there's a key player that is out, go and have a look and see how that affects other players. Take note of historical information and take note of our cheat sheets that have got obviously value numbers that are going to help you at a glance identify players that are probably going to perform better for you. But most importantly, just have fun and watch it. We love it, and it can be quite a foreign experience for people that have never seen AFL before. But it's a fast game. There's always action, and on a DFS side of things, every player is in play. In NFL or NBA, players can hit the bench and you don't see them again for half a game. Or if it's the offense is running or the defense is running, half your players are not in play. In AFL, everyone's in play. Everyone, you can be 50, 100 points down in a slate, and with 5 minutes left, you can come flying home. So it's a fantastic sport to watch. You're very lucky that obviously you guys have now got it on TV to watch, and there's lots of tools and things that can help you. But, give it a go. While you guys don't have any sort of other main sport running, give it a crack. You'll love it. It's a brilliant game.
If for no other reason, the sweet uniforms. You guys have some awesome uniforms over there. I enjoy them at least.
Yeah, look, they're good. And I guess, again, that's a little bit of the tradition. You know what I mean? They wear, basically a singlet and shorts in, incredibly cold, wet weather, no padding. Yeah, it's a good game.
Hey, touch on that one more time, if you don't mind, as far as, let's just say hypothetically, the team's best midfielder, their most dominant midfielder, is not playing. What is the trickle-down effect as far as does each guy get an extra 2 or 3 minute run, or is there one player that steps up and goes from playing, 12 minutes to 27 minutes, and he's priced for playing 12 minutes, so he becomes a super value? Or again, is it sort of like team dependent? It depends upon which team this happens to be happening to.
Look, I think it's all of the above. So if you lose your absolute best player who might be earning 100 fantasy points, generally teams are not one player driven. So you have a core of players that are all carrying the load. But if you lose your top player, that load needs to be distributed a little bit across the other players. So someone that might be averaging 80 points might suddenly move to 85 or 90, because they're getting extra opportunity with the ball. Actually, amount of time they're playing on the ground doesn't really alter. It's more just the roles that they're playing. So that can happen, with all aspects of around the ground, whether they're defenders or forwards or midfielders. If there is a player that isn't playing, look for the people that are getting opportunities. And that's where the player out tool, very similar with NBA. It's not quite as drastic, but it's similar. So I guess we use the LeBron example again. If LeBron is not playing, there's going to be certain players that are suddenly then going to get the ball a lot more than they usually would because he's not there. Exactly the same situation in AFL.
Yeah, much appreciate your time, AJ. Tell the people about where they can find you on Twitter. Tell them about your site. Tell them about your podcast. Tell them everything.
Well, you can find me on Agi if you want to see some rants about Richmond and obviously some football stuff. But make sure you check us out at dailyfantasyrankings.com.au. We're at Rankings DFS. All the information is obviously on RotoGrinders. We provide you guys an early look article with all our data tools, some tips, some multimedia. We're actually doing a new video show for you guys this week, which will be available on RotoGrinders. Of course, Lineup HQ is the best in the business, and that has all of our projections done by our team here. So if you want to quickly build lineups, go and jump onto rotogrinders.com and use the Lineup HQ. And yeah, there's always details there. So you can certainly hit me up on Twitter if you'd like more information, or reach out for yourself. I'll certainly give you all the details. But keep your eye on rotogrinders.com and you'll be able to find all the info you need to get involved.
You got me convinced. I'm going to do my best to play this week. What else am I going to do, right? So I'm going to play some golf probably, some MMA. I mean, like, where do I draw the line? I'm playing some Aussie football as well. And hopefully maybe I'll get my schedule so I wake up and actually watch it on time as well, too. AJ, much appreciate your time. Thank you for your expertise. He was AJ. I was Dean. This was The Morning Grind. Thanks for listening. We're out of here. Holler.